Growing up in the 1970s wasn't about trophies or participation medals. It was about something deeper, a quiet resilience that modern life has all but erased. If you were shaped by that decade, you carry strengths most people today will never understand. And the world desperately needs what you have. The 70s weren't designed for comfort. There were no safety nets, no constant validation, no digital escape routes. You learned to solve problems without asking for help, to entertain yourself without a screen, and to navigate a world that didn't bend to accommodate your feelings. That wasn't cruelty. It was preparation. And whether you realize it or not, those years forged something rare inside you. The ability to stand firm when everything around you shifts. Let's start with something most people overlook: self-reliance. Not the modern version where someone watches a YouTube tutorial and calls themselves independent. Real self-reliance, the kind where you figured things out because there was no other option. Your bike chain fell off, you fixed it, bored on a Saturday, you created your own adventure. No one was coming to rescue you from discomfort, and that taught you the most valuable lesson of all. You are capable. Today's world operates differently. There's an app for everything, an expert on speed dial, a forum where strangers will solve your problems while you wait. Convenience has replaced competence, but you still carry that instinct to try first, to troubleshoot, to persist when the easy answer isn't available. That's not just a skill, it's a mentality. And it makes you fundamentally different from generations raised to outsource every obstacle. Here's what most people miss about that kind of independence. It wasn't about being alone, it was about being capable alone. You could work with others, collaborate, ask questions when needed, but you never required someone else to function. That distinction matters, because the ability to stand on your own doesn't make you isolated. It makes you unshakable. Then there's patience. Not the passive kind where you scroll your phone while waiting. Active patience. The ability to sit with discomfort, to delay gratification, to let things unfold in their own time. In the 70s, you didn't get instant results. You planted seeds and waited for them to grow. You saved money for months to buy something you wanted. You called a friend's house, and if they weren't home, you just tried again later. No panic, no frustration, just acceptance that some things take time. That patience shaped how you handle stress today. When life doesn't move at the speed you want, you don't unravel. You adjust. You wait. You trust the process because you've seen it work before. Meanwhile, the modern world has conditioned people to expect immediate answers, instant relief, constant progress. When reality doesn't cooperate, they break. But you've been training for delays your entire life. I'll give you an example. Think about how you learned anything back then. You couldn't Google it. You couldn't watch a quick video. If you wanted to know how to do something, you found a book, asked someone who knew, or experimented until you figured it out. Each method required patience, and each method taught you that knowledge is earned, not downloaded. That changes how you value information. You don't skim, you absorb, you don't forget easily because you work to understand it in the first place. Now let's talk about something even rarer: the ability to be bored without breaking. This might sound trivial, but it's one of the most underestimated strengths you possess. Boredom in the 70s wasn't a crisis. It was just part of life. And in those long, empty hours, your mind learned to wander, to create, to problem solve in ways that constant stimulation never allows. Boredom forces your brain to generate its own entertainment. That's where creativity comes from. That's where deep thinking happens. But today, the moment someone feels unstimulated, they reach for a device. They flood their brain with content, notifications, noise. They never sit in silence long enough to hear their own thoughts. You do, you can, and that gives you access to a kind of clarity most people have lost. There's a neurological reason this matters. When your brain isn't constantly reacting to external input, it shifts into what scientists call the default mode network. That's where reflection happens, where you process experiences, connect ideas, plan for the future. It's the mental state that builds wisdom. But you can't access it if you're always consuming. The 70s gave you something priceless: hours of uninterrupted mental space, and your brain still knows how to use it. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Growing up without digital distraction also taught you how to read people. You learned to pick up on body language, tone, subtle shifts in mood. because that was your only option. You couldn't text to avoid an awkward conversation. You couldn't hide behind a screen when someone was upset. You had to face people directly, read the room, adjust in real time. That made you socially intelligent in a way algorithms can't replicate. This skill shows up everywhere. In meetings, you notice what isn't being said. In relationships, you sense tension before it's spoken. In conflict, you can navigate emotions without escalating. These aren't talents you were born with. They're the result of thousands of face-to-face interactions where you had no choice but to pay attention. And in a world where people increasingly struggle with basic human connection, your ability to read a room is more valuable than ever. But perhaps the deepest strength you carry is this: you know how to exist without validation. You didn't grow up with likes, comments, or shares measuring your worth. Your identity wasn't crowded sourced. You figured out who you were in private, through trial and error, through quiet reflection. That gave you something rare, a stable sense of self. Today, people curate their lives for an audience. They shape their opinions based on what gets approval. They panic when the feedback stops. But you've always known that your value isn't determined by external applause. And that makes you immune to a kind of anxiety that's crippling millions. What we're really talking about here isn't nostalgia, it's infrastructure. The 70s built something inside you that modern life no longer constructs. And whether you've named it or not, you feel the difference. You've lived through something that can't be recreated. And the question isn't whether you should try to adapt to modern life. It's whether modern life realizes what it lost by leaving those principles behind. Let's talk about something you probably take for granted: your relationship with time. In the 70s, time moved differently, not slower, just more honestly. You couldn't fast forward through commercials. You couldn't skip to the end of a song. If you wanted to see a show, you waited until it aired. If you missed it, it was gone. That taught you patience, but more importantly, it taught you presence. You learned to be where you were, fully, because there was no other option. Today, people exist in a state of constant elsewhere. They're physically in one place while mentally scanning 5 others. They watch movies on double speed. They skim articles instead of reading them. They're always hunting for the next thing before they finish the current thing. But you still know how to sit with something until it's done. That's not old-fashioned. That's focus. And focus is the most valuable cognitive resource in the modern economy. Here's what makes this even more powerful. Your ability to finish what you start wasn't just a habit. It's neurological wiring. When you commit to something and see it through, your brain releases dopamine at the completion. That's the reward cycle. But if you're constantly switching tasks, constantly interrupted, that cycle never completes. You end up in a state of perpetual incompletion, which creates background anxiety. Your generation built strong completion circuits. You started projects and finished them. You read books cover to cover. You had conversations that reached actual conclusions. And your brain learned that completion feels good. That wiring still works. It's why you can sit through a long dinner without checking your phone. It's why you can read a full article without getting distracted. It's why you can have a conversation that lasts more than 3 minutes. These aren't small things. They're the foundation of deep work, real relationships, and mental peace. Now let's address something nobody talks about. You're better at being alone. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference. Loneliness is painful, but solitude, that's where you recharge. You grew up in a world where being by yourself was normal. You took walks without headphones. You sat in waiting rooms without scrolling. You drove in silence. And in those moments, you learned something crucial. Your own company is enough. Today, people are terrified of being alone with their thoughts. The moment they're by themselves, they panic. They need noise, distraction, something to fill the space. But you've always known that silence isn't empty. It's full of reflection, memory, ideas, peace. That's a kind of emotional maturity most people never develop. What's interesting is how this connects to decision-making. Because you're comfortable with solitude, you're also comfortable with uncertainty. You don't need to crowdsource every choice. You don't need to poll your friends before making a move. You can sit with a question, think it through, and decide. That's becoming rare. Modern life offers endless options, but no framework for choosing. People get paralyzed because they're overwhelmed. But you grew up in a world with fewer choices, which meant you learned to commit. You picked something and lived with it. That built decisiveness. And decisiveness, even when you're wrong, moves life forward in ways indecision never can. There's something else worth naming: your ability to maintain long-term relationships. You didn't grow up with the idea that people are disposable. If you had a disagreement with a friend, you worked it out. You didn't just block them and move on. If a relationship took effort, that was normal. You didn't expect everything to be easy all the time. That gave you relationship endurance. You know how to stay when things get hard. You know how to forgive without keeping score. You know how to invest in people over years, not weeks, and in a world where people ghost each other over minor inconveniences, your loyalty is rare. It's also magnetic. People feel it. They know when someone is capable of real commitment, and they gravitate toward it, even if they can't always reciprocate. Let's bring this full circle. Everything we've talked about, the patience, the focus, the resilience, the independence, these aren't relics. They're advantages. The world didn't become easier when it became faster. It became harder, harder to concentrate, harder to connect, harder to feel grounded. But you're still walking around with the operating system that handles all of that naturally. You don't have to learn it. You already know it. The only question is whether you recognize its value. Because here's the truth. Modern life is starting to realize what it lost. You see it everywhere. People are deleting apps. They're buying flip phones. They're trying to reclaim attention, presence, patience. They're attempting to rebuild what you never tore down. And while they're struggling to unlearn their conditioning, you're just standing there, already whole. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to own. You didn't lose relevance when the world went digital. You became the benchmark for what balanced actually looks like. So the next time someone implies that your way of doing things is outdated, remember this. Outdated means it doesn't work anymore, but everything you carry still works. It works in relationships. It works in focus. It works in resilience. It works in peace. The world didn't move past these things. It just forgot how to build them. You didn't, and that makes you more equipped for modern life than people half your age who were born into it. You're not behind. You're just operating from a foundation they're now desperately trying to reconstruct. That's not nostalgia. That's foresight you didn't know you had. The 70s didn't just shape your past, they prepared you for right now. Every strength we've talked about, the patience, the presence, the ability to stand alone without breaking, those aren't memories, they're tools, and the world needs them more than ever. You're not adapting to modern life. Modern life is finally catching up to what you've always known.